What's up, guys? Welcome back to Almost Functional 40K. Continuing our dive into the Pariah Nexus mission card pack. We're getting ready to go over the secondary objectives. So, in Pariah Nexus, you can score up to 40 points for each primary, each secondary. Not for each secondary. You can score 40 total secondary points in the Pariah Nexus, which is the same as Leviathan. 50 for primary, and 10 for battle ready for a total of 100. So you still have the option of going fixed or tactical. There are now 18 tactical options and 9 fixed, so a little more of both. If you do fixed, you draw 2 cards, or not two, draw 2. You pick 2 fixed objectives at the beginning of the game. Those are your 2. You can score up to 20 per, and up to your total of 40. And if you draw tactical, if you take tactical, you draw 2 at the start of your first turn. Every time you achieve one, you discard it. If you don't achieve it at the end of the turn, you can potentially discard it to get a CP. And then at the beginning of each of your turns, if you have less than 2 cards, you draw enough to get you back 2 cards. And each card will tell you how to score it, what points to get. And once again, your total cannot exceed 40. So if you've been playing Leviathan, that's all exactly the same. The only difference is there's some new missions and some of them has changed slightly. So let's go ahead and start taking a look at them. We're going to start with the 9 fixed. These also can be played as tactical. So just remember that 2 of these can also be used as tactical. But the first one coming up is Cleanse. And all the... Hold on, let me bring my camera up with the cards. All of the ones that have the option to be fixed will have this symbol on them, and there are 9 of them. So the first one is Cleansed. It's an action. All right, so let me go over actions real quick. Those of you who have been playing for a while, actions used to be a thing. Then they kind of took the word action away, and we had like semi-actions in the last pack, but they weren't actually actions. So here, let's give you this. So actions are something that you can do on the secondary mission cards and possibly on a primary mission. So each action states which units can perform it and when it is started and completed. All that'll be on the card. A unit cannot start to perform an action if one or more of the following apply. If it's an aircraft, so aircraft can never do actions. If you're battle shocked, have OC 0, you're within engagement range. Unless you're a Titanic character, they can still do an engagement range. If you advanced or fell back, and if you're not eligible to shoot this phase, including units that have already shot that phase. So those are the restrictions of units that can't do actions ever. There are more restrictions on certain cards as to which units can be selected, but these are the things that will always disqualify you from doing an action. Advanced fell back. Some of that you can do with battle line and certain missions with certain mission rules, but they will specifically tell you, and then they'll overrule this. And then if a unit starts to perform an action until the end of the turn, that unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge unless it is a Titanic character. In which case, until the end of the turn, that unit cannot start to perform another action and is not eligible to declare a charge. If a unit performing an action makes a move, excluding pilot and consolidate, or leaves the battlefield, that action cannot be completed. So you can't hop back into reserves and complete your action. You can't move away from the area unless you're piling in or consolidating. You can't charge. You can't shoot. So if you have an action that lasts through your opponent's turn, if they charge you, you can't fight, you can't pilot, you can't consolidate. Titanic characters are able to action and shoot, but they're still not able to action and charge. So that's just a brief rundown of actions, because we will see them a lot on these cards. All right, so anyway, back to Cleanse. In your shooting phase, you can start an action. 1 or more units from your army within range of the objective marker that is not within your deployment zone. So there are no restrictions here on which unit can do it, just the restrictions in the main card pack. So vehicle, infantry, anything can do this. And then it completes at the end of your turn. If the unit performing this action is still within range of the same objective marker, and you control that objective marker. So you have to control the objective marker by the end of the turn. You don't have to control it when you start the objective or start the action, but you have to control it by the end of your turn. If you do that, then that objective marker is cleansed. If you cleanse one objective marker, you get 2 VP. If you cleanse 2, you get 4. And you'll notice, even though this is fixed, there are no more bonus points for doing it as tactical. So it's not going to be 3 and 5. It's going to be 2 and 4, whether you do fixed or tactical. So that's a quality of life change for fixed. Well, I guess it doesn't make fixed better. It actually just makes tactical worse, but it brings fixed closer to tactical. So, because I don't think a lot of people took fixed. I think tactical was 95% what people chose. So I think they're trying to make fixed a little more of an option, something you can build into. And it has to be, you can't do the objective marker in your deployment zone for that. So the next one we have is Storm Hostile Objective. Still a tactical. These first 9 will all be fixed. These first 9 will all be fixed. And then you can also play them tactical. So this one, when drawn, if it's the first battle round, you can draw a new secondary mission card and shuffle this card back into your secondary deck. Now, it no longer says you have to shuffle back. So if you, for some reason, have the opportunity to complete this, you could keep the card. But it can only be achieved from the second battle round onwards. So I don't know why you'd keep it, unless you just wanted to discard it for a CP or thought, well, I'm not going to score much turn 1 anyway, no matter what I draw, and I probably can get this turn 2. So you have the option to keep it. But anyway, from the second battle round on, it scores at the end of your turn. If you control 1 or more objective markers that were controlled by your opponent at the start of the turn, or if your opponent did not control any objective markers at the start of the turn, and you control 1 or more objective markers that you did not control at the start of the turn. So this is exactly the same way as it was before, except that tactical and fixed score the same amount of points for it now. Other than that, it plays exactly the same as it played in Leviathan. Next up, we have a new one. This one is called the Horde. Oh, and another thing about the first 2, Cleanse and Hostile, they both happen on objectives. So they also play into primary, because you're trying to be in those spots anyway to score primary points. Now, these next 7 all do stuff that don't really involve objectives, so they're actually achieving things that don't necessarily go hand in hand with the primary. They're their own kind of thing. But anyway, Call the Horde. When drawn, if there are no enemy units on the battlefield that satisfy either of the conditions required to achieve this card, you can discard it and draw a new card. So that's nice. I've noticed that on a few of these, you have better options of getting rid of your cards. All right. So this can be achieved any battle round. While this card is active, each time an enemy infantry unit is destroyed, if 1 or more of the following conditions are satisfied. The starting strength of the destroyed unit was 20 plus. The total wounds characteristics of the model of the destroyed unit was 25 plus at its starting strength. So this all of the starting strength. It starts with 20 or more models, or it starts the game with 25 plus wounds. For the purpose of both conditions, models and attached linear units are ignored. So if they have characters attached to it, you don't count them for model size or for wound count. It should just be their retinue. Or I guess if you killed a knight that had 25 plus wounds, they would count for that. I don't know if there's any attached. I don't think there's any attached characters that would have enough wounds to qualify for either of these. And then you score 5 victory points. So that's pretty simple. That seems like a tough one to do fixed, unless you're playing against like GSC or Orcs, maybe. The next one we have is Bring It Down. This one we saw in Leviathan. If there are no enemy monsters or vehicles on the battlefield, you can discard this card and draw a new one. This is nice. We didn't have this option before. If you drew it and they didn't have anything you could score it off of, you were stuck with it before. And this can be scored any battle rounds. While this card is active, each time an enemy monster or vehicle is destroyed, 2 VP. If it had 15 or more wounds, a +2 VP. If it had 20 or more wounds, +2 VP. So the max you can get now is 6, where I believe the max before was 8. As I guess this isn't capped, but I think you could have got 8 for one of the bigger vehicles, or I might be wrong about that. But I don't see a cap here for tactical or fixed. So you can just score a lot of points at one turn, it looks like. Because I believe on tactical you were capped at 8. If you could pick up a couple knights in the turn, you could score a lot of points on this, it looks like. But yeah, I don't see anywhere on here where it's capped. So that's a change. You were able to discard it. I believe the thresholds of wounds for points changed, and there's no cap on points for tactical. Next up, we have another new one. This is called Establish Locus. This one takes an action, which starts in your shooting phase. 1 unit from your army, so once again, any unit. End of your turn if that unit is within your opponent's deployment zone or within 6 inches of the center of the battlefield. If completed, your unit establishes a locus. So this is nice. These actions that complete at the end of your turn are a lot easier to achieve. So this is one where if you do it within 6 of the center, you get 2 VP. If you do it in the opponent's deployment zone, that's 4 VP. So if you have some up-down units, like the Calidus, although with her nerf, I know people won't take her as much, like some of the Custode stuff, Grey Knights can do a lot of this. You can easily find a hole in your opponent's deployment zone most of the time to get these 4 points pretty easily. Certain armies like Grey Knights, you possibly take this and try to achieve it every turn. So it's definitely a really interesting one there that, depending on your mobility, could be fairly easy to achieve. Next up, we have Assassination. So this one actually has 2 different listings, one for tactical and one for fixed. If you take it as fixed, you get 4 points every time you kill an enemy character. Kill up to 5 to max your 20. But if you take it as tactical, the turn you draw it, if you kill a character, you get 5 VP. If, when you draw it, you have already killed all the characters your opponent owns, then you still get 5 VP. So that's basically how it works now, I believe. I don't believe there's really any change there from Leviathan for Assassination. Next up, we have Behind Enemy Lines, another one from Leviathan. A bunch of these you'll see are new, and some of them are exactly the same. So this one, when drawn, if it's the first battle round, you can draw a new secondary mission card and shuffle this card back into your secondary deck. So once again, don't have to. And this can score any battle round. So certain armies, like if you went second, you had a couple units that could up down, you might be able to achieve this turn 1. So in that case, you might keep it. So end of your turn, 1 unit from your army, excluding aircraft and battle shock units, wholly within your opponent's deployment zone, you get 3. You do it with 2 units, you get 4. So there's no bonus for tactical here. So 2 units versus 3 units is really only 2 units versus 1 unit is really only 1 victory point increase. So depending on the situation, whether you're going to just be losing units, it might be better just to take the 3 instead of sacrificing a second unit just to get 1 victory points. But depending on how the game's going, that's something you can decide as it happens. Next up, we have Recover Assets. This is a new one. So when drawn, if there are fewer than 2 units from your army on the battlefield, you can discard this card, draw a new secondary mission card. So then this is an action that you start in your shooting phase. 2 or more units from your army, if each of those units is wholly within a different one of your following areas, your deployment zone, no man's land, your opponent's deployment zone. So you can do this with up to 3 units, 1 in each of the areas. Complete at the end of your opponent's next turn or the end of the battle, whichever comes first. If either 2 or 3 of those units are on the battlefield, those units recover assets. So basically, they just do the action through your opponent's turn, or if you're lucky enough to draw this turn 5 and you went second, you can really pretty much auto-achieve this. But if you do it with 2 units, either your deployment zone, no man's land, or the enemy's deployment zone, any 2 of those 3, you get 3 victory points. If you manage to do it all 3, you get 6 victory points. It's a pretty big chunk of stuff, but you really have to have 3 units you can do actions with that are really across the table. Then the last one is engage on all fronts, the last of the fixed. So when drawn, if there are fewer than 3 units from your army on the battlefield, you can discard this card and draw a new one. Achieves at the end of your turn on any battle round, 1 or more units from your army, excluding aircraft, wholly within 3 different table quarters, and those units are all more than 6 inches away from the center of the battlefield. So now it's 6 inches from the center of the battlefield. I believe before you also had to be a certain distance from other table quarters. So that's nice. That's more back to the way it used to be. So that'll be a little easier to achieve. And if you do it with every table quarter, you get 4 victory points. So you do 3 table quarters for 2, 4 table quarters for 4. It looks like it's a little easier to achieve because you only have to be in the table quarter, wholly within, but not more than 3 away from another table quarter. And just more than 6 in the center of the battlefield. So that looks like it got a little easier to achieve. But once again, there's no extra bonus for tactical, so you'll be scoring 1 point less when you do it. So that's the 9 fixed, which also play in as tactical. And now we have the 9 that can only be played as tactical. These first couple are going to be ones that also link into the primary, where if you're doing them, you're scoring them and primary points, which is pretty good. So the first one is extend battle lines. You control 1 or more objective markers within your deployment zone and 1 or more objectives within no man's land, 5 BP. If you only have 1 unit on the battlefield and you control a marker in no man's land, you get 2 BP. I believe this is exactly the way it was before. I don't believe there's any change from Leviathan for extend battle lines. Next up, we have defend Stronghold. Once again, if this draw the first battle round, draw a new secondary mission card and shuffle this card back into your deck. This is one of the few that has to do it. It's not a may, so you can't score turn defend Stronghold turn 1. At the end of your opponent's turn or the end of the battle, whichever comes first, you control 1 or more objective markers in your deployment zone, 3 BP. Another one that's no change, exactly the same as Leviathan. Secure no man's land, another one from Leviathan. Any battle round into your turn, control 1 objective marker in no man's land for 2 VP or 2 for 5. Don't believe there's a change there either. That's pretty much exactly how that was in the other one. In Leviathan, here's no prisoners. While this card is active, each time any unit is destroyed, 2 VP up to a maximum of 5. So 1 unit is 2, 2 units is 4, 3 or more units is 5. Once again, I believe that is word for word the way it was in Leviathan. Overwhelming force. Any battle round, while this card is active, each time an enemy that's started within range objective marker is destroyed, 3 VP up to 5. So 1 unit 3, 2 or more 5. Once again, exactly the same as Leviathan. Then we have Sabotage. This is a new one. So this is an action. You start in your shooting phase. 1 unit from your army that is within a terrain feature and not within your deployment zone. And it says within a terrain feature, not wholly within. So you only have to have part of the unit in there or part of the model. Although you might have at least 1 model fully to be considered within. I'm not 100% sure on that. But you don't have to have everybody in the terrain. Completes at the end of your opponent's next turn or the end of the battle, whichever comes first, if your unit is on the battlefield. If completed, your unit commits Sabotage. At the end of your opponent's turn or the end of the battle, your unit commits Sabotage this turn is not within your opponent's deployment zone. 3 VP. So if you destroy a no man's land 1, it's 3 VP. If you destroy if you sabotage the terrain in no man's land, it's 3 VP. If you sabotage the terrain in your opponent's side, it's 6 VP. And it says within your opponent's deployment zone, not wholly. So if a piece of terrain is even partially in your opponent's deployment zone, it would count for the 6 VP. Same for this one. It doesn't say wholly within. Yeah, so it has to be a terrain feature, not your deployment zone. So it can't be within your. So it has to be wholly out of no man's land for any of it. Like, you can't be partially in yours because it can't be within. But to get the 6, it only has to be partially in your opponent's. So that's an interesting thing, because in a lot of these layouts, and depending on player plays, depending on where you play, some of these will have a piece of terrain that's just partially in the opponent's deployment zone, so you should be able to get the 6 for sabotaging those. Next up, we have area denial. End of your turn, 1 or more units from your army, excluding aircraft or battle shot, within 3 inches of the center of the battlefield, and there are no enemy units within 3, you get 2 VP. Or if you have one of your units within 3 of the center and no enemy within 6, you get 5. I believe this is exactly the same as Leviathan as well. No real change there. This next one, Marked for Death. This is another new one. When drawn, your opponent must select 3 units from their army on the battlefield. If there are only 1 or 2 units from your army on the battlefield, they must select those units. If there are no units from their army on the battlefield, discard this and draw a new secondary mission card. And now pay attention to these, because some of them tell you to discard the card and some of them tell you to redraw and shuffle back in. So just make sure you do that correctly. Then this scores end of battle round, any battle round, end of either player's turn. If 1 or more of the selected units were destroyed, you get 5 VP. You don't have to kill all 3, you just have to kill 1. So depending on what you're facing, that may or may not be a feasible thing most of the time. Then the last of the 18 cards from the secondary deck, Containment. It's an action starting your shooting phase, 1 or more units from your army that are wholly within 9 of 1 or more battlefield edges and not within your deployment zone. Select a different one of those battlefield edges for each of those units. Completes immediately, so it happens right there in your shooting phase as soon as you do it. Each battlefield edge you selected is contained by your army. So you have 3. So you get up to 6. You have 3 per up to 6. So you can do your opponent's back edge or either of the 2 side edges. You can't do your back edge. Depending on whether, it doesn't matter whether you're doing long ways or short ways. You can do the 2 sides as long as you're outside your deployment zone, and you can do your opponent's back edge if you're in their deployment zone. But you only get points for up to 2, so you don't need to do all 3, and that'll score you 6. So that is it for the secondary mission deck. I like that they kept a lot of the old ones. A lot of the old ones were pretty good, and they also added some new ones, tweaked a few of them slightly. I'm really excited for this new deck. I'm really looking forward to starting playing it. I think the secondaries are much better than before. You also have the option to use the stratagem for 1 CP to get rid of a card and draw a new one. You can do that every turn now, so you're able to, if you're careful with your CP, cycle through a little quicker, get the stuff you want, get rid of stuff you don't, and you have more options to get rid of unachievable stuff just naturally on the card without having to spend the CP. So that is really nice. If your deck runs out, that's it. You don't have any more. You don't get to reshuffle it. You don't get to retry to score. That's it. But that's pretty much it for secondaries. Thank you guys for watching. If you're still here, go ahead and like, subscribe, and we'll be getting back to you with more Pariah Nexus. We got secret missions we're going to do. Probably do a review just on the pack, what few differences there are, and we got all the Pariah Nexus tournament command and stuff to look at. But thank you guys, and we'll get back to you later.